I have finished Drive to Survive Season 5, so I figured I would make a little video here to kind of give my overall thoughts for this season. So I've kind of seen online that a lot of people really enjoyed this season and thought it kind of returned to how Drive to Survive was in Season 1 and Season 2. And I kind of agree that it's a bit more like Season 1 and Season 2 and that there was way less fabricated drama. But honestly, I didn't really enjoy this season. I guess I'll kind of give the things that I disliked about it and then at the end kind of go over what I liked. I really think the biggest thing that was missing for me was that it was way more focused on the team principles and the teams themselves than the drivers. The thing that Season 1 and Season 2 did really well is that they introduced us to each of these drivers. You got to see a little bit more of their personalities. We got to see some at-home segments and a little bit about their families. And I feel like that was entirely missing from the season. The only segments that I can think of where they spent some time away from the track with the drivers was Carlos and Lando and Charles playing paddle against each other. I think that's the only scene from the entire show this season that was with the drivers away from the track. And I think it was just really missing that. I'm guessing that part of that is that the drivers have had so many media responsibilities as the number of races have increased that I think the teams probably wanted to take some of that responsibility off of them, but I think the show suffered as a result. There was a lot more focus on the team principals this year, and a lot more of the home segments were with them, because you still had a lot of the Gunter Steiner at his home in North Carolina. You had Steiner and Binotto's clown car, which honestly was such a good moment. That was hilarious. That was the best kind of off-track scene that we got in this whole show. And yeah, it was way more just focused on what happened at the races and at the track. And that was kind of disappointing for me, because that's one of the main reasons why I watch the show, is to get those kind of behind the scene little clips with the drivers. But I think that was another issue, is that it was very heavily focused on the races, and in 2022 the races weren't that good. And so I think the stuff that they did cover wasn't overly dramatic. I think they picked 4 races, I want to say, that they kind of focused on. I don't know, they focused on a lot of races, but not many of the races were all that good. And then they didn't focus at all on Brazil, which was the most dramatic race of the whole season. They only briefly mentioned Kevin Magnussen's pole. They briefly mentioned George's win, and then they didn't mention the crazy radio messages between the Alpine drivers and then the Red Bull drivers, at all. There was no mention of it. And in what world would they not include that, unless they're pushing it to include in season 6, in case, I guess, if things escalate between Max and Checo, then they'll include it. But if things don't escalate, then they're going to leave out the most dramatic thing that happened on track, the entire season. And I don't understand that call. And yet the fact that they focused on Abu Dhabi instead of Brazil was just a little bit weird. That's another thing that I'll kind of say in general, is that I think they let a few of the teams off easy as well. They only had the one episode that focused on Ferrari's various mistakes, and at least they kind of gave a sense of why Ralph fell in Binotto and how many mistakes they made and how some of the other teams felt about that. So that was interesting to see, but they only really mentioned the mistakes at Miami, which I don't even remember having been a mistake. Obviously Monaco got quite a bit of coverage, and then maybe with Charles and Silverstone. But they didn't mention France until the end of the season. They didn't mention Imola at all. They didn't mention Hungary at all. And then they briefly mentioned Spa for Charles at the end. So they had that one dramatic episode, but it could have been way better. And then there also wasn't enough Seb content. They had that one moment, which I think was really well done, like having the surprise of him releasing that Instagram message and getting Checo's immediate reaction to that was really good. I liked that moment. But they didn't mention his last race being Abu Dhabi at all. They focused that entirely on Daniel. And that was a little bit disappointing considering he was kind of featured in season 2 and he's such an important figure. And when Fernando retired, they had a lot more coverage on that and didn't really mention Seb at all. So I don't know, that was a bit disappointing as well. And one thing I noticed overall as well, the episodes were all extremely short. Like I remember in seasons past they'd all be at least like 40 minutes long and some of them even 50 or over close to an hour. So I don't know if they just didn't have enough content to make that amount of an episode length, but almost every single episode was like a little over half an hour. And so that was really disappointing as well. And it just shows that maybe they just didn't get good enough footage this year. And maybe just 2022 was a down year, as I said, and so there wasn't enough dramatic material to make the cut. But then that also kind of showcased how they didn't have any behind the scenes content with the drivers to kind of pad the episodes up a bit. So, yeah, I don't know. It just, to me, it didn't show enough of the human side of F1. And that's the thing that I really, really like about the show. I think there were some improvements, though. They did a better job of not fabricating any drama. The only time I kind of noticed this was the episode where they pitted Pierre and Daniel against each other for that Alpine seat, even though everyone knew that Pierre was getting that seat. So that was a bit of an odd choice, I think. But yeah, they didn't have any sort of like fabrication of drama between teammates or anything like that. They kind of had a few clips of Lando saying some typical Lando things about not having sympathy for Daniel, but I think they didn't try to frame it as they hate each other this season or Lando being any type of way about it. There were a few moments though that I really, really did enjoy. The entire Alpine episode was peak Drive to Survive. That was so good. You just had so much dramatic irony with Alpine talking about how cohesive of a team they are and how they had 3 strong drivers and how they were really pushing up the grid and looking to improve, and just Otmar being like so overconfident and going to the BWT celebration thing instead of trying to nail things down with Fernando, and it cost him. And that was so funny. That entire episode was so well done. And that's when Drive to Survive is really good, is like they're very good at covering those dramatic moments. I think the cost cap episode was also decent, but the rest of them, there just was an element of like the human drama that was just missing for me. The other moments that I really enjoyed, the opening episode with Steiner and Bonato in that tiny little Fiat was so good, and them going on a little wine date in the Dolomites. Oh my god, that was so good. But like that was like the only kind of moment like that it felt like they had the entire season. So I don't know if like the teams, I know that they all kind of sat down with the producers to kind of guide them in how they wanted the show to go, and I don't know if part of that was less of these things, but the season was missing them. It was really missing those kind of funny moments. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm the only one who feels this way though, because everyone else I've seen talk about it are like, oh, it's like a lot better, it was a lot more accurate, which like, yeah, but it was missing, I don't know, it was just missing some stuff. The interviews with the drivers were also really good. I think it gave a lot of insight, especially with the Ferrari drivers, on how they really were feeling about things. I think they were a lot more candid in these interviews than they were in kind of any of the press pens. And so that was really good to see. And then seeing, yeah, how the other teams felt about Ferrari making decisions, that was really neat. And how the other teams felt about Red Bull breaking the cost cap. Oh, and then of course the team principal meeting in Canada. I think that felt a little bit over dramatic. I feel like Toto probably was putting on a little bit of a show for the cameras, but I think he was genuinely upset. And so that was a very interesting moment. And that's the kind of stuff that is good to see from Drive to Survive. And that's kind of the content that I watched. And it also made me really wish they would bring back them filming the driver briefings, because that is peak comedy. Oh my God. That one where they get that shot of Checo from the memes is just so good. I love it. It's just like a sitcom. And I feel like Daniel's producing a show, and I feel like he should make that the show, because I think it's just too good. And speaking of Daniel, I think his send-off was really well done. He's been such a big part of the show for all 5 seasons, although less so in this season. And I think he's really going to be missed for sure. I'm hoping that he'll still appear in season 6 if he manages to get a seat back, and they'll kind of have a sit down with him again. But yeah, just like such a bummer. I'm having a tough time telling if this season wasn't very good because the 2022 season in general wasn't all that great, or if just experiencing all of the politics and drama that happened off track kind of as it happened was way more enjoyable than any coverage that Netflix could give to it. But yeah, I think there was only like 2 really good episodes, and then the rest just kind of had a few good moments and just too much race footage and not enough behind the scenes stuff. So overall, just a little bit of a disappointment for me. It wasn't overly dramatic, but I think it was too under dramatic. So they still haven't managed to kind of strike the balance that I feel like season 1 and 2 had, where they were able to make it dramatic and cover things. They had a lot of like behind the scenes with the drivers, but never made it overly focused on, I don't know. Just season 1 and 2 strike the balance perfectly, whereas season 3 and 4 went too far in the dramatic direction, but I think season 5 went too far in the underdramatic direction. So I'm hoping that they can kind of find a happy medium moving forward. And they gotta like lengthen these things, because it just didn't feel like they had enough content. One thing, maybe another reason why they didn't have enough content, is that I think the teams are a lot more aware of it now and are a lot less candid with Netflix now and don't really give them as much access as they used to. Yeah, overall, just a bit disappointing. So, what are your thoughts on Drive to Survive Season 5? Did you enjoy the season, or were you disappointed like I was? I'll see you guys around. Bye.